come only from the Sahihain or one of them. And he has about 400 odd hadith. Ibn Hajar came and put Bulugh al-Maram. It's got about 1,200 odd hadith. Just waiting for my stream to load. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Carrying on with Kitab al-Buyu', we were speaking about Babul Khiyar. Khiyar is where somebody has a option or they have a choice to carry on with the sale or to annul the sale or go back on it. And we took Khiyarul Majlis, which happens in the actual gathering. Then we took Khiyarul Shart, if they want to add on to that. Then we took Khiyarul Ru'yah, if somebody bases the transaction on up until they see the product. Okay. And today we're taking Khiyarul Aib. Okay, Khiyarul Aib. Ain, Ya, and Ba. Okay. Aib literally means a defect. So here they're telling you that if you buy a product and then you find that the product has a defect, are you allowed to go back or not on it? So that's what they're speaking about. Now, in some of the Hanafi books, here they speak a lot about defect and they got masail from the olden days. However, the other books of fiqh, they've gone into a lot more detail and they've broken it down, they've structured it well. But the summary of all this is if you purchase something and you have no khiyarul majlis and you had no khiyarul shart and you had no khiyarul ru'ya and then you bought a product and you found a defect in it, as somebody who's buying, you have a right to go back to the seller. Now, what do you do when you go back? You have two options. Most of the books of fiqh tell you these two options. Either you return the goods, okay, and you return the goods and you take back the full amount that you paid, or you are happy with the defect and you keep it, meaning you don't go back on it. They have a debate as to returning, or as they have a debate as to getting a little bit more money whilst keeping the goods, i.e., let's say you paid 100 and then you found it had a defect, so you go back to the seller. So he says, okay, you know what, keep it, but I'll refund you $20, something like that. So that's why they have a bit of a sticky part. They allow it in some instances and some instances they don't. But that's the gist of it. You find a defect, you can either return it or you keep it with the aib, with the defect. Now, products are different. How you discover a defect on a product differs according to the type of product. So with some of them, for example, by you seeing the defect, okay, you need to see the product. So let's say you're buying a car and you're looking at the bodywork from the outside, or you buying a building. Okay, let's say you're buying a building. You look at the brickwork and the structure, and everything seems okay. You've seen it. Here, if something had to happen later on, you can't go back on it. Why? Because the building itself, you saw it. Now, if you had to see a defect, the onus is upon you to mention that defect and say, you know what, there's this of a defect. Because if you don't speak, okay, and you don't exercise your right when you've discovered this aib or this defect, then you lose your right. So some products you find it just by seeing. Some you find them by using, okay? So let's say a car, you buy the car. Apparently everything seems okay. But you'll only find the defect on this car when you start using it. So the minute you switch on the car and it goes into, or it's not going into first gear, where it's making a noise, here you found a defect. It's upon you to tell the person that, you know what, the car I just bought, there's a defect, and either I want to return it, or I want to exchange it, or I want my money back. How did you get that? You got it by using it. Okay. Number three, there's certain things which, in order for you to use them, or to find the defect, it's different from the first and second category. You actually have to destroy the item. The only way you can know if there's a defect is if it is destroyed and cannot get back to its original form. And that happens a lot with food or fruit. So, for example, if you've got a watermelon, the only way you'll know if that watermelon is good is if you cut it open. Once you cut it open, it cannot go back to what it was previously. So here we'll say that if you find a defect in it, you are allowed to return it back to the seller. Okay. And even though you've opened it, here, let's say, for example, here's something you've opened. Here we speak about this watermelon. Okay. Even you've opened it, you cut it open. Even though you've opened it, I'll give you what's practiced upon almost everywhere right now is you can return it and you take your refund, or they'll give you another one. In some of the books of fiqh, they have a long debate as to do you only get a partial refund, or do you have to pay for what you ate, or if you had to sell, etc. A long, long debate. What we'll say is that generally it's become the norm and practiced upon, especially when you're dealing with high-end companies, or when you're dealing with first world countries. If you find a food item, you had to open the milk, for example, and the expiry date is still valid. However, you found that it's gone bad. Here you'll be able to return it and they will give you it back. And some people don't even want the product back. But how do you differentiate now between these three? The first is you could see the defect by looking at it. Second is you found the defect by using it. The third is you found the defect by having to open the product or destroy it to a certain degree. Here you are still allowed to go and return it back to the seller. That's your Islamic right. Thereafter, there are a few more categories, but these are the main. What happens if the seller, when they're selling, they say we're selling on condition that we are free from any responsibility if a aib comes up, if a defect comes up? Is that permissible or not? Is it permissible for a seller to say, I'm selling you on condition that any problems, okay, it's not my fault. It's the risk you take and it's up to you. Similar to that would be selling, for example, on a no returns basis. Okay, because you tell them, you know what, I'm selling this to you, the goods as they are. They're good or not good or faulty or whatever, that's your baby. It's not mine. The scholars have a few opinions. First is, this is not allowed, okay? First opinion is, this is not allowed. Why? Because what if this person bought this product and he goes home and he finds that it's faulty? Does he not have a right to return it? So that's why they said it's not allowed. Second, they said no, he's allowed to, the transaction is correct and he's allowed to take the goods. Okay? If anything happens or doesn't happen, the transaction is correct and he can't go back. For example, if I'm selling you my phone and I say that any problems that arise after you buy this phone, it's got nothing to do with me. You're buying the phone as is. They say it's allowed, and if any problems arise, that's your fault or your baby. Third opinion, which is a mix between these two, we'll say that if the seller knows of a defect, and this defect is going to affect the product in a major way, it can become unusable. or very difficult to use or take away from its value, and he knows about it, here upon him is to tell the person buying. It will be uh, haram for him to hide this type of aib or this type of defect. Why? Because it affects the actual product being bought, especially if he knows about it. Is the transaction correct or not? Will we say that the transaction is correct, however, is sinful? We could say that, or we could say that for him, the transaction is wrong and he's also sinful both ways. As for if it's a small defect, it doesn't really affect the product. And he tells them, you know what, I'm selling to you as is. Maybe there's a small chip on the paintwork of a car, there's a few scratches here and there, and says, you know what, it's got nothing to do with me, you're buying as is. It doesn't really affect the usage of the product. Here we'll say it's better for you to have told. However, you're not obliged, so that will still be correct. Three opinions you got here. Is the transaction correct or not when a person sells with al-bara'atu min al-aib? Hanafi madhab lean more towards it being allowed, only because they say one of the reasons is it doesn't lead to what's called munaza'ah. It doesn't lead to dispute. Why? Because when you sold, you told the person you can't come back with any complaints. So there'll be no dispute, the fact that he agreed with it. And you must remember yourself as a seller, when you're getting into these deals or you're buying things like this, if you're going to assume that much risk, you need to either protect yourself or know what you're getting yourself into. Happens a lot when you're buying like old things from the auction, etc. They may work, they may not work. So look at the policies or put caveats or conditions such that you're able to protect your rights in case anything happens. That's khiyarul aib in a nutshell. What we will say is that this aib, as long as it hasn't been agreed to leave this aib, meaning they haven't agreed to say, you know what, if anything happens to this product after it's none of my business. As long as they haven't agreed to that, then if any defect arises whilst the person is using, uh, they allowed to go back with it. How long before a defect or how let's say how much time do you have with that product before you can go back on the defect? We'll say it's according to the product and according to the norm of that product. So for example, if you have a bottle of milk and you buy it and you found that today it's not good, the onus is upon you to go today, tomorrow, or the next day at most, and return that bottle of milk. However, you can't come and tell the person 3 months later that, you know what, one day you sold me a bottle of milk, so now I'm coming, because you left it and you went away with it. So there's a time period, or we would say a time period to make it fair for the buyer and the seller. And different items have different time periods. Because some of them you would only find after usage or heavy use or light